Boston stuff, Niagara Falls just grabbed my interest. There have been some rather tragic people dying in Kauai, and then, is it Yosemite where it happened, or there's something happened this week where 3 people fell in?
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, Yosemite's a regular place for people to sort of push them too far and fall down a precipice.
Looking to do the photographing, I guess, is what's getting these people. Mm-hmm. But I was just noticing that things are happening. So the general public is getting this daring attitude to get over the guardrails and get their own photos, maybe with the cell cameras. Who knows why?
Yeah, that's interesting. Uh-huh.
Niagara Falls, as an environmentalist, this role separate but related to his better-known work as a landscape architect, Olmsted was deeply involved in the preservation of this place. Mm-hmm. Could you, for our audience, because that's such an iconic...
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, Niagara Falls was the #1 tourist attraction by the time it came to Olmsted's attention that it was really in terrible decline. He was working in Buffalo, doing the Buffalo Park system, and he started traveling to Niagara Falls, and it was, at this point, it was lined with paper mills and flumes. There was the Great Blondin, this acrobat would regularly cross the gorge beneath the falls on a tightrope. There were signs for like Parker's hair balsam that were up on the walls of the gorge that the falls pours into.
Like a baseball park with
like a
signs
baseball,
for the
yeah,
TV.
Exactly. It was crazy. And then maybe, I mean, this was already bad. Maybe worst of all was it wasn't really a place where you could go as a member of the public and without paying a fee, see the views of the park. What would happen was people owned or claimed to own the few promontories you could go out on and look at the falls, and so they would charge you. I mean, you'd be some poor person who traveled to this tourist destination, and they'd charge you $10 to conduct you through the flumes and other circus attractions to this little point where you'd stand for a few minutes and look at the falls, and they'd bring you back quickly and bring out the next person. And so Olmsted was deeply involved. He was really the key figure in this effort to get rid of all that stuff, the advertising, Great Blondin, the flumes and the paper mills, get all that stuff removed, turn it into a kind of park from the standpoint, there were pathways and railings and things and benches pointing towards particular vistas, and that was, he led the effort that resulted in sort of the 19th century saving of Niagara Falls. Of course, a lot of people would describe Niagara Falls today as being kind of an aberration. At least you can look at the falls and not have the Great Blondin walk by on a tightrope or see a big sign for Parker's hair balsam. So at least that's preserved. But of course, if you look up, the illusion's broken. You see, big tall buildings on both the Canadian and the U.S. side that kind of break the spell.
And that's too bad. It was amazing they actually got the paper mills out of there.
Yeah, it was incredible. It took a lot of, the main thing it took was appropriations. Olmsted fought to help drive this bill through the U.S. or through the New York Assembly that provided enough money for them to buy all these properties, knock down the mills, et cetera. It's a big undertaking.
Now, he did the Boston Common?
No, he actually didn't do the Boston Common. What he did was, when he did the Emerald Necklace, the Boston Common was, I guess, a colonial era, sort of a classic colonial green or square, gathering spot from colonial times. And part of Olmsted's brilliant design for the Emerald Necklace was actually to take part of Commonwealth Avenue, kind of move it so it connected to his existing Emerald Necklace, and then that would attach to the colonial area of Boston Common, so create the Emerald Necklace then sort of integrated this colonial era park into the whole park system.
So the Common existed,
That's
and
right.
he kind of attached it to his Emerald Necklace.
Exactly. The Common existed and the Boston Garden existed. Those were two, and Commonwealth Avenue. So he made those, and then he curved it around and made it connect to his new park system.
Which was Boston, Mass. The Arnold Arboretum. Mm-hmm. A unique piece of the Emerald Necklace, an ambitious park system that Olmsted created for Boston. A tree museum jointly maintained by Harvard University and the city, and that's in Cambridge, isn't it? Right on the Charles?
It is, yep. Mm-hmm.
On the Charles River. So he went there, and then the Back Bay Fens, which is right near Fenway Park. Mm-hmm. The monumental structure hewn of Cape Ann granite. I don't recall the structure.
The structure is the Boylston Street Bridge. Yeah. And it's kind of, the Back Bay Fens is sort of a wild space, and so the Boylston Street Bridge kind of gives it a focus. It's this big sort of bridge made of big rough-hewn pieces of granite.
And then Franklin Park, of course, where the big zoo is. Mm-hmm. And then in Brookline, Fairstead. I'm not familiar with Fairstead either.
Fairstead was his, as I described it earlier, his upper middle class house in the suburbs. So he had it's a great place to visit. It's in Brookline. It's at 99 Warren Street. I remember the address well from when I visited there, and it's It's got 2 acres of land surrounding a modest house by the standards of what a known person he was, but a very, very, very beautiful house. And then the grounds are kind of like a private, it's like as you might expect, someone who's a landscape architect of his renown. When he landscaped the 2 acres, he turned it into really a beautiful personal park. It's actually a great place to visit.
So, what did he really consider home?
Well,
where?
He for a long time he grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. For a long time he lived in New York City. New York City really did become home, but then, by late in his life, he really wanted to come home, as many people do. He wanted to go back to Hartford in a way where he'd grown up and had his roots, but his father, when his father died, he entered into a really bruising, terrible estate battle with his mother-in-law, and so he literally couldn't go home again to Hartford. But then he got this great commission. The Boston Park Commission asked him to design this whole series of parks, the Emerald Necklace. So he thought, at least if I can't go home to Hartford, at least I can go home to New England. So he moved to Boston. Lived there the rest of his life. Yep.
Oh, so he, and working with so much work up here.
Yeah, no, for him it was fantastic because there was much work to be done, and really he spent some of the most productive years of his life doing some of his best work in Boston.
So what's good for Boston, and I'm glad you just said that, his best work. I'm thinking he's doing all these other cities. He must have had all this knowledge he didn't have for somewhere else to put in here.
He did. I mean, he first came to Boston in 1878, so that's 20 years after he designed Central Park, 10 years after he started designing parks like the Buffalo Park system and the Chicago Park system. So he really brought a great level of wisdom, life experience, expertise, and park experience to the Emerald Necklace and the other things he did in and around the Boston area.
I'm fascinated by Mary Baker Eddy, and I interviewed her biographer, Gillian Gill, who lives right up here in Bedford. Mm-hmm. She also did a biography of Agatha Christie.
Oh, great subjects.
But with Olmsted living here and Mrs. Eddy having such power with that beautiful church, I don't think Mrs. Eddy wanted the church, but there you have the church, almost like alongside his emerald necklace, having an impact on the geography of Boston.
Mm-hmm. No, the Emerald Necklace definitely did that. And you're suggesting the church that sits there also is a real landmark, is that right?
Well, yeah, and then they have the waterfalls, and it's adjacent to the Prudential Center. And whenever tourists come to Boston, I tell them to go to the Christian Science Center and go to the Mapparium. Have you ever been to the Mapparium?
I haven't been. I'll have to visit both of these places you just described, so I've not been to these spots.
The Mapparium is wonderful. Do you know what it is?
I don't know what I don't know what a Mapparium is. I should ask that first.
Mapparium was built back in his day. Mm-hmm. It's stained glass. It's a plank. You walk the plank and you're inside a glass sphere of planet Earth.
So it's like a globe?
It is a globe you're walking through.
Oh, wow.
It used to be free, and then they spent millions renovating it, and now I think they charge $5, something like that. But it is, you have to be very quiet. It's so acoustically perfect. You rub your fingers, everyone can hear it in the room. It's just like listening with a stethoscope, one of those, is a stethoscope the doctors use? It's amazing what you can hear. You have to whisper.
And so it sounds like it's pretty big. A lot of people can be in there at once. Is that right?
Yes, it's very big. It's bigger. It's maybe as big as this room or bigger.
Wow.
Definitely bigger than this room because you're walking the plank, and it's above you and below you. And when you see, Iran, Iraq, you see Persia, because they're not going to touch it.
So it's so it's true to what geography was in that era. It's, as far as what the countries are labeled, it's what they were called then. So I have to visit this. So.
I think it's one of these great wonders of Boston. People think Prudential Tower, John Hancock Tower, Symphony Hall. Well, this is right across the street from Symphony Hall. And then you have these wonderful landmarks that add to what he did with the necklace. And it fits into the tapestry very nicely.
It's interesting you said that, because one of the things that's certainly the case with Olmsted's work is, of course, he's building parks, but if you're an architect, you want to design buildings often on a park. And so there are all kinds of, I describe, for instance, I describe it as an asynchronous collaboration between Frank Lloyd Wright, who is not Olmsted's contemporary, but all over the Midwest. There are Olmsted parks with Frank Lloyd Wright houses on those parks. Because, Frank Lloyd Wright is a designer. What are you going to, want to give the client a really nice place? Put the house on a park. So, there's a lot. So I guess a lot of times the parks are surrounded by as you described with this Christian Science church or other really notable architectural buildings, churches, what have you, that are the park is an ideal place to place these.
I think the Christian Science Publishing Company owns a lot of the Back Bay. It was donated by some of the members of the church. So it has withstood the test of time, as has Symphony Hall, and it's all a lovely kind of addition to Boston's character. But I was going to bring up Frank Lloyd Wright, but I didn't know if I would. I'm glad you did, because people know him. Simon and Garfunkel have a song on the guy, I think.
That's right, yep.
So, he comes to mind when you're thinking of design. And so, but that's interesting. So even though they weren't contemporaries, there's a lot of parallels here.
There's a lot of parallels there, and it's also interesting that Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. was a kind of an apprentice in the Olmsted firm after Olmsted died. So there's some collaboration there, but none that involved these two great men ever meeting one another.
Some synergy.
Yep.
The Literary Republic. What was his life as a writer?
He had quite a. He first had this sort of, you might almost call it like a correspondent adventure. I mean, it's like if someone were to go off today to Afghanistan or something. He traveled through the American South at a time with real tensions, and he saw slavery firsthand, saw plantations firsthand, report on it. So that was a real adventure. Then, on the strength of that job, on the strength of the reporting he did for the New York Times, he landed a job that had him rubbing shoulders. He landed a job with a magazine called Putnam's. He's an editor of that magazine. That had him rubbing shoulders with the likes of William Makepeace Thackeray, Emerson, Thoreau, Longfellow. Olmsted actually copy edited a couple of short stories by Herman Melville. So and Olmsted himself described that as being in the Literary Republic. He was working as an editor for this very esteemed literary magazine that's long dead, called Putnam's, and editing some of the great literary talent of the day.
Now, did you get to look at any of this on microfilm, or?
Yeah, I actually looked at old issues of Putnam's. They're fun to look at, and
you can't find them on eBay.
Yeah, you might. It's funny, if any exist in physical form, they probably would try to sell on eBay, because they probably fetch a decent price. Almost every issue is going to have a poem by Longfellow or an essay by Thoreau or something, and it was very pleasurable to look through these and sort of see see some of these works that Olmsted worked on. One of the things I really enjoyed was you could actually find the Herman Melville stories that he'd edited, and then there's a really scholarly biography of Melville which describes exactly what Olmsted did to edit these short stories. So you can look at the final short story in Putnam's, and then you can go to the scholarly work about Melville and say, okay, Olmsted did this, that, and the other, so in order to change the story. So
that should be taught in colleges in a writing course.
Yeah, it was funny that the main thing that Olmsted did, you'll get a kick out of this, is he had an American dictionary, an American English dictionary, as opposed to an English dictionary, and so Melville was still spelling words like mold. He was spelling them M-O-U-L-D. And luster, he's spelling L-U-S-T-R-E. And so mostly Olmsted's copy editing consists of going through Melville's story and changing the English spellings to American English spellings.
I like to spell luster, L-U-S-T-R-E, but
that's a nice spelling, right? It looks nice. It looks good.
It reads better because luster just seems so crass.
Yeah,
for a word like luster.
Yeah.
So
I agree with you. That's maybe.
So you give me permission to go back to the Old English when I use the word.
I think it'd be a good idea to go back to that Melville story, exhume it, re-edit it,